It happened quietly, the way the most dangerous events always do. No emergency broadcast, no dramatic press conference, no countdown clock on cable news. Just fragmented reports leaking out of Venezuela in the dead of night, confusion, silence, and then the claim that American forces had detained the country's sitting president under the justification of national security concerns. Most people scrolled past it. Another foreign headline, another unstable country, another mess that didn't seem to matter to everyday life. But if you understood the system behind the headlines, you felt something different, a tightening in the chest, a sense that something old had been touched. Because this wasn't just about Venezuela. It wasn't about democracy. It wasn't even about oil, at least not directly. This was about the currency system that keeps the modern world standing. Venezuela isn't just a country with political problems. It sits on the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, heavier and harder to refine than Saudi crude, but strategically priceless. And in a world where oil still powers transportation, agriculture, plastics, shipping, and militaries, control over energy flows is control over economies. When power moves against a country, like Venezuela, it's never random. It's never humanitarian in isolation. It's always financial. The event mattered not because of who was taken, but because of what system was being defended. Because when a country rich in oil starts questioning the currency that oil is sold in, it isn't just challenging a market. It is threatening the scaffolding holding up global power. And once you see that, the silence makes sense. The story didn't start last night. It didn't start this year. It didn't even start in Venezuela. To understand what just happened, you have to understand the language of money and the one deal that turned the US dollar into the most powerful weapon in history. Before we talk about oil, soldiers, or geopolitics, we need to strip away a lie most people never question. Money is not wealth. Money is not value. Money is not even real in the way we are taught to believe. Money is a system of trust, enforced by power. Long before paper bills or digital accounts, humans operated on obligation. If you borrow grain, you owe grain. If you took protection, you owe loyalty. Debt came before currency, not the other way around. Currency was invented to make debt portable. Once societies grew too large for personal trust, governments stepped in and standardized obligation. Coins represented promises. Paper represented claims. Eventually, numbers on a screen replaced both. But the function never changed. Money tells people what matters. Money decides who eats and who starves. Money determines who is forgiven and who is punished. And whoever controls the rules of money controls the system beneath society itself. For centuries, power came from land, armies, and gold. Gold mattered because it was scarce, hard to fake, and universally desired. Empires rose and fell trying to control it. But gold had a problem: limited expansion. You could only grow an economy as fast as you could mine metal from the ground. Wars were expensive. Empires needed something better. That something better arrived after the Second World War, when most of the planet lay in ruins and one country emerged untouched. The United States didn't just win militarily, it won financially. And in 1944, while the war was still raging, the real victory was locked in behind closed doors. At Bretton Woods, 4 to 4 countries gathered to rebuild the global financial system. Officially, the goal was stability. Unofficially, it was about dominance. The United States held the world's gold. Its factories were intact. Its economy dwarfed everyone else's. So the deal was simple. Every major currency would be pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar would be pegged to gold. On paper, this looked fair. In practice, it made the dollar the center of global trade. If you wanted to buy, sell, rebuild, or grow, you needed dollars. For a while, the system worked, but it worked because the world trusted that the US would keep its promise, that dollars could always be exchanged for gold. That trust didn't survive war spending. Vietnam broke the illusion. The US printed far more dollars than it had gold to back. Other nations noticed. Some began demanding gold instead of paper. The vaults started draining, and in 1971, the United States did something unprecedented. It broke the deal. President Nixon went on television and announced that the dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. Overnight, the dollar became fiat money, backed by nothing but belief. By every historical precedent, this should have collapsed the system. It didn't, because what replaced gold was something far more powerful. Here is the pivot point that explains Venezuela, the Middle East, endless wars, and the strange resilience of the U.S. economy. After abandoning gold, the dollar needed a new anchor, something the entire world needed constantly, something no country could function without. That thing was oil. In the early 1970s, the United States struck a quiet deal with Saudi Arabia. In exchange for military protection, weapons, and political backing, Saudi Arabia agreed to sell oil, only in US dollars, not gold, not local currency, dollars. OPEC followed. The world followed. If a country wanted energy, it first had to obtain dollars. This created permanent global demand for the US currency. It meant the US could print money, run deficit, and consume more than it produced without immediate collapse. Oil didn't just fuel cars, it fueled the dollar itself. This system allowed the US to export inflation, finance its military, and maintain global influence without traditional empire building. But it also created a fatal dependency, because the moment oil-producing nations question the dollar, the entire system trembles. And that brings us back to Venezuela. Venezuela is often described as a failed state, a socialist experiment gone wrong, or a cautionary tale about corruption. That framing is convenient, but it misses the real reason the country never escapes global attention. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Not Saudi Arabia, not Russia, Venezuela. The oil is heavy, difficult to refine, and expensive to extract, which is why it stayed underground for so long. But in a world where energy demand never stops, difficulty does not equal irrelevance. It equals leverage. For decades, Venezuela sold oil within the dollar-based system. The flow of crude fed the global market, and the payments reinforced the petrodollar structure. As long as that relationship held, instability was tolerated. Governments came and went. Sanctions were adjusted. Rhetoric rose and fell. The problem began when Venezuela started talking differently. Not loudly at first, not dramatically, just small moves, energy deals discussed outside the dollar framework, oil for goods exchanges, trade agreements with rival powers that bypass traditional financial channels, quiet alignment with countries openly talking about de-dollarization. In the language of global finance, those moves are not policy disagreements. They are acts of rebellion. A country with massive oil reserves does not need permission to exist, but it does need permission to trade. And trade, in the modern world, flows through currency systems controlled by a few central powers. Once Venezuela began drifting away from that system, the pressure intensified. Sanctions multiplied. Access to international banking was cut. Assets were frozen. The economy collapsed further, which was then used as evidence that the country could not govern itself. This is how financial warfare works. You starve the system, then blame the hunger. And when economic pressure stops working, history shows what comes next. Sanctions are often sold as moral tools. They are framed as consequences for bad behavior, violations of international law, or protection of human rights. But when you strip away the language, sanctions are something much simpler. They are economic sieges. A sanctioned country cannot access global banking systems. Its currency collapses. Imports become scarce. Inflation explodes. Daily life becomes unbearable not for leaders, but for ordinary people. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the design. When people are desperate enough, they turn on their government, or at least, that is the theory. But there is another effect sanctions create, one that is rarely discussed. They force sanctioned countries to look for alternatives, new trading partners, new currencies, new financial rails. Venezuela didn't turn to China and Russia because it wanted ideological alignment. It turned because it had no other option. And those partnerships came with something far more dangerous than weapons or loans. They came with currency experimentation, oil deals denominated in yuan, barter systems bypassing dollars entirely, state-backed cryptocurrencies, regional payment systems designed to avoid US-controlled financial networks. Each of these moves was small on its own, but together, they formed a pattern. And patterns are what empires fear most. Because once one oil-rich nation proves it can survive outside the dollar system, others start asking the same question, not out of ideology, but out of self-preservation. The petrodollar works only as long as it is unquestioned. Empires do not collapse when they are strong. They collapse when confidence erodes. The United States does not maintain global dominance through military power alone. It maintains it through belief. Belief in the dollar, belief in stability, belief that there is no alternative. But belief is fragile. When countries begin discussing alternatives openly, when oil trade starts settling in non-dollar currencies, when alliances form around parallel financial systems, belief weakens. And when belief weakens, force fills the gap. This is why moments of geopolitical aggression often coincide with financial stress. It is why currency challenges are met not with debate, but with sanctions, coups, regime change narratives, and sometimes direct intervention. From Iraq to Libya, from Iran to Venezuela, the pattern repeats. Leaders who openly challenge dollar-based energy trade do not retire quietly. Their countries become problems. Their governments become threats. Their instability becomes urgent. This does not mean every conflict is caused by currency, but it does mean currency determines which conflicts are ignored and which become emergencies. When reports emerged of American involvement in detaining or removing leadership in Venezuela, the shock was not that power was used. The shock was how unsurprising it felt to those watching the financial system closely. Because when a country sits on massive oil reserves and begins flirting with non-dollar trade, history suggests that patience runs out. This is not about ideology, it is about enforcement. For decades, the petrodollar system created an illusion of permanence. The US could run deficits without consequence, debt could rise without panic, inflation could be exported abroad. But systems built on trust face a problem when trust becomes optional. Today, the world looks different than it did in 1974. Energy markets are more fragmented. Regional alliances are stronger. Technology has made alternative settlement systems possible in ways that did not exist before. Countries are watching what happens to Venezuela closely, not because they agree with its government, but because they see the consequences of challenging the system too early or too openly. The lesson is not don't resist. The lesson is be careful how you do it. This is why de-dollarization is happening slowly, quietly, in bilateral agreements, and trade corridors away from headlines, and systems designed to function parallel to the dollar rather than directly against it. The petrodollar does not collapse overnight. It erodes, and when erosion accelerates, the world enters dangerous territory. Because no empire transitions gracefully from monetary dominance. The incentives favor delay, denial, and force. Venezuela is not the end of this story. It is a chapter, and the chapters that follow will determine whether the dollar remains the language of global power or becomes one currency among many. Every time the news announces that the economy is growing, most people feel confused. If things are improving, why does life feel harder? Why does food cost more? Rent climb faster than wages, and debt feel permanent no matter how hard people work. The answer lies in how money enters the system. Economic growth does not mean wealth is evenly distributed. It means more money exists. But where that money appears first determines who benefits and who falls behind. When new money is created, it does not flow directly to workers. It enters through banks, government contracts, military spending, financial markets, and large corporations. Those closest to the source receive it first, when prices are still low. By the time it reaches regular people, prices have already adjusted upward. This is why inflation feels invisible at first and brutal later. It is not caused by people suddenly spending more. It is caused by money being created faster than value. The petrodollar system magnifies this effect because global oil trade requires dollars. Foreign nations must hold US currency. That creates constant demand for dollars, allowing the United States to print more without immediate collapse. But printing does not create wealth. It redistributes it. Those with assets benefit. Those without fall behind. And the longer this system runs, the wider that gap becomes. Most people believe debt is a personal mistake, a sign of irresponsibility, something to be ashamed of. That belief is useful because the modern economic system depends on debt, not as an accident, but as fuel. Every dollar created through lending comes into existence as debt. Mortgages, student loans, credit cards, government bonds, corporate borrowing. The money supply expands only when someone agrees to owe. This means debt is not a side effect of the system. It is the system. When governments borrow, they issue bonds. When banks lend, they create money. When people borrow, they lock themselves into long-term obligations that require steady income and obedience to the system. Debt disciplines behavior. It keeps people working jobs they dislike. It delays rebellion. It forces compliance not through violence, but through obligation. A person drowning in debt does not strike. They cannot risk instability. They cannot afford resistance. On a national level, debt works the same way. Countries trapped in dollar-denominated debt must earn dollars to survive. That means exporting resources, accepting IMF conditions, opening markets, and aligning policy with creditors. Venezuela's refusal to play this game fully is what made it dangerous. Weapons do not always explode. Sometimes they depreciate. A currency losing value punishes savers. It rewards borrowers. It erodes trust slowly enough that people adjust instead of revolt. Inflation is one of the most effective tools of control ever invented because it feels natural. Prices rise. Wages lag. Life gets harder. People blame themselves, but inflation is not random. It is a policy outcome. When too much money chases too few goods, prices rise. When supply chains break, prices rise. When governments print to cover deficits, prices rise. And when oil prices rise, everything rises. Energy is embedded in every product: transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, packaging. When oil is priced in dollars and that system is stressed, inflation becomes global. This is why petrodollar instability matters even if you never trade oil or watch Geopolitics. It shows up at the grocery store, at the gas pump, and in rent increases that feel disconnected from reality. They are not disconnected. They are downstream. The petrodollar does not need to collapse for the effects to be severe. It only needs to weaken. If fewer oil trades settle in dollars, global demand for dollars decreases. If demand decreases, the ability to print without consequence shrinks. That forces difficult choices: higher interest rates to attract buyers of government debt, reduced spending, austerity, or more aggressive enforcement of the system through sanctions and geopolitical pressure. None of these options are painless. This is why global instability often coincides with monetary shifts. The system resists change because change is expensive. Venezuela represents a warning sign, not because it succeeded in escaping the system, but because it tried. And attempts matter. Because once enough countries experiment, coordination becomes possible. Every generation believes it is living through unprecedented times. Most are wrong. This time might be different. Technology allows alternatives to emerge faster: digital currencies, regional trade agreements, blockchain settlement systems, and non-Western financial institutions now exist at scale. The dollar is still dominant. The petrodollar still functions. But dominance is no longer absolute. And absolute dominance is the only kind that feels stable. This is why narratives are tightening, why media messaging is sharpening, why certain countries suddenly become villains while others are forgiven. It is not about morality. It is about alignment. History shows that when economic systems shift, political systems follow. Empires do not fall in a single moment. They fragment, they strain, they enforce. Venezuela is not the cause of this tension. It is a symptom. The question is not whether the system will change. The question is who controls the transition. Those who understand money early adapt. Those who worship it blindly suffer. This does not mean abandoning the system. It means seeing it clearly. Money is a language. Debt is grammar. Oil is punctuation. And power belongs to those who read between the lines. If this made you uncomfortable, that is intentional. Comfort is expensive and truth rarely comes cheap. If you learned something today, hit like. It tells the algorithm this conversation matters. Subscribe if you want to understand the world before headlines do. And comment below with one word: awake. Because the system works best when people don't ask questions. And the moment you start asking, you are no longer invisible.